This video is brought to you by Patreon provider Abel.
Hello and welcome. There's no sense beating around the bush, so let's just get right into it. This Leupold Mk6 1:6 first focal plane has been sent in courtesy of Patreon provider Abel. Abel, if you remember correctly, is the gentleman that sent in the Trijicon Credo 1:6 first focal plane. Promptly after I sent him that back, after I was done with it, he returned it for a full refund because he just wasn't too thrilled with it. And neither was I, to be honest. It wasn't good enough in almost any regard. But Abel still wanted basically that same formula. A lightweight LPVO, first focal plane, really good illumination. And you know what? There aren't that many options. The Credo 1:8 probably would have been good if it didn't weigh 27-ish ounces, but it's just way too heavy. So him and I scoured the internet trying to figure out what to get next, what to do, where to go from here. And yeah, there are a couple of options, but nothing that really struck a chord with him. It wasn't until this thing popped up used with that Alamo 4-star mount that we looked at for such a good price that he couldn't say no. Unfortunately, with that price means that there was no box, or there was no box and thus maybe the price was lower. That makes a little bit more sense. But this so far feels like it will fit the bill absolutely perfectly. Now, when these came to market, they were very expensive. Around $3,000, a little bit less. Of course, you can get them for cheaper. But about a year or so ago, I kept on finding these things go up used for around $1,500 to $1,800, and most of them were beat up, like they had been through a war, probably because they were. And I always wanted to get my hands on one, but they were just so expensive. I never thought I'd be able to actually get one. However, here we are. And the first thing you're going to note, despite the fact this has a 34mm tube, is that it doesn't feel too heavy. And when we put it on the scales, just over 17 ounces for a 1:6 LPVO isn't half bad. But with a 34mm tube, that makes this thing pretty friggin' lightweight. And Leupold is great at keeping the weight down. One such example is where we're going to end up starting. The eyepiece is not a fast focus eyepiece. It is a regular standard eyepiece, which is phenomenal. You have a lock ring right here, which is on there pretty tight, as you could see. Then you have very fine threads to make very precise adjustments to the ICO housing. Now, yeah, it's going to take a little while for you to get it in focus, but once you're there, you lock this up, and you never have to worry about it ever again. From there, we move to the magnification ring, which is a little bit more old school in the sense that it doesn't have a cattail or throw lever. It has this little raised bump to indicate 1x, but you get a standard 180 degrees worth of rotation and these really nice splines. The ring is very smooth and is well damped. Nice. It feels quality. That's the best way of putting it. It feels really, really nice. Now, from there, we're going to move on to the illumination control, which to the keen viewer, you might realize, is that a button on the side? And you know what? It absolutely is. What that button is for is to open up the battery compartment. Ain't that sweet? There's no reason for that to be there. This could just be a little threaded cap, but I guess Leupold didn't want you clocking this thing all the way to one extreme or the next and trying to remove a cap. Instead, let's just put a little button on there, a really nice big foam pad, and a big O-ring on the inside to seal it. Under the battery, you can see a very nice little arrangement of fingers in there to hold the battery nice and firm. Leupold right there on the board for a little added class. The battery snaps in a little bit, is held in firm. You close the door, a nice positive lock, and you're good to go. Illumination goes from off to 7, with offs at each extreme and in between. No, this does not rotate 360 degrees. You have 2 hard stops, so that's something to keep in mind. Despite the fact this thing is old and used, the detents on this is incredible. Granted, the arrows don't necessarily line up 100%, but this thing feels so fantastic in hand. Once it's in, it's staying in. There's very little to no wiggle whatsoever, and it's a nice positive click every single time you adjust it. Now, moving on to the elevation turret, they are exposed, which I don't necessarily like on LPVOs, but this is locking. You have like a CDS style reticle here, which is, I believe, one of the first iterations they had of it. And you can see 2 lines of numbers. The bottom one is clearly mils, which, if you could see, one click is 0.2 mrad, which is more than finite adjustment for an LPVO of any kind. But I'm not interested in the bottom, I'm interested in the top. So you can clearly see a 2 by 100 meters. This is set up for a 200 yard zero, which on a 5.56 makes sense, because at 50 yards and 200 yards, you're basically going to be zero. 100 yards will shoot a little high, and then anything beyond that is going to start shooting a little low. You got to bring it up a little bit. So how does this work? Well, we'll talk about the reticle more in depth later, but let's say you zero it for 200 and you have a 300 yard shot. You push the button, you turn it a little bit, that disengages it. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 900 meters. Clearly right there, 5.56 is what this is set up for. Now granted, this isn't going to be perfect, but I'm pretty sure if you wanted to send these into Leupold and maybe get them tweaked a little bit, you could. But you know what? To use this as a quick guide to get you in the ballpark, I think is fantastic. Windage controls are very similar. You have the locking tab on top, push, and start to rotate to unlock it. You have to the right, whoop, 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 and then to the left. This thing is very tight, but it feels good. Detents are there. There's not a real positive click, but again, for something like the windage, I'm not overly concerned. Let's take a look through this thing and see what we've got.
This is just going to be the cliff notes. What do we have so far? Well, we don't have a lot of the scope body that we're seeing while we're looking through it, which is very nice. The image at 1x seems to be pretty good. We have a good field of view. Everything seems to line up as far as the power lines are concerned, which is always a good thing. And the reticle, albeit this is not the more desirable drop reticle, you know, it is what it is, it's okay. But the real question with that will be, how bright is the illumination on this reticle at 1x to be able to use it properly, like a red dot, like how an LPVO at 1x should be used. While we're talking about the illumination, let's see if this will be the first focal plane LPVO to give us true daytime bright illumination. And you know what? I would say that gets a pass so far. It is a very clear and bright sunny day, and we're able to see that illumination very easily, albeit on a very light surface. So that is a win. Typically, first focal plane LPVOs fail horribly in the overall brightness department when it comes to their illumination. But so far, so good with this thing. Another thing to take a real quick note of is just how good the glass quality is. It looks really good from minimum to maximum magnification, and it should for the price. This being about a $2,000 optic, I would really hope that it would at least perform well in that regard. So far, this thing seems to be a really good package. It's fairly lightweight, it's got some really good options, it's got daytime bright illumination, which is always a plus no matter what the optic is. We don't see much of the scope body, and the glass looks pretty clear. And I think that's the perfect place to end this. So far, happy story. If it can perform this well in a multitude of environments and when you actually get behind it and use it, then I will be extremely, extremely happy, and I'm sure so will Abel. With that, thank you very much for watching, and as always, see you again next time.
And a very huge thank you to all of my Patreon providers. Without you, this wouldn't be possible. If you'd like to help support the channel but don't want to join my Patreon, I completely understand. But you can still help support by using my affiliate links in the description below. Thanks again for watching.